Good morning, Metalheads here, and welcome to a new episode of the Metal Meltdown, and today we're taking a look at a shitload of albums that we never got the chance to properly review in the month of October 2019. This was an insanely busy month for October, and granted, I feel as if I talked about as many important releases as I could, but even so, we still missed a lot. So much so that I'm already willing to bet that even by the end of this video, I will have missed plenty of other records. I mean, October just consistently threw so many interesting and high-profile releases at us. The killer is, it looks like November's gonna do the fucking same. I mean, 2019 is certainly going out with a real bang. So with that in mind, I don't really want to waste any time. I just want to get right into it. Here are all the albums that I feel I missed in October 2019. Let's start with Easter is Cancelled from The Darkness, an English glam rock band that I used to really love. In fact, I think their debut album is a fantastic rock and roll record. Unfortunately, ever since then, their music's been pretty hit and miss for me. I mean, I enjoyed Last of Our Kind and Hotcakes, but I completely skipped on Pinewood Smile, and I think One Way Ticket to Hell and Back is a legitimately really badly constructed record. In the end, I would say that Easter is Cancelled is a predictable but still really enjoyable, well put together piece of modern rock infused party music. It's got the glam flavors, it's got the spark and the glitz of Def Leppard and the hard-hitting rock and roll mentality of AC/DC. It probably wouldn't change your mind if you truly fucking hated this genre, but the people who truly do want to listen to this kind of music could certainly do with a hell of a lot worse, especially when considering how fucking barren this genre is. I mean, Van Halen is gone, Motley Crue is gone, every other glam metal band is either inactive or just not doing anything all that interesting, so this is really the next best thing you got, next to something like Steel Panther. So, you know what? Yeah, I'd say fuck it. If you're looking for dumb hooks and dumb riffs and you're not really concerned with the most intelligent and eloquent material out there, then just go nuts, enjoy this record, have fun. Lord knows that's what the Darkness want, and Lord knows that's what they do as well. Next up, Heart Like a Grave from Insomnium, another deliciously melancholic, mournful, and melodramatic piece of music from this crew. 8 albums into their career, they have an established sound, one that they very clearly at this point do not intend to stray from. They write epic, icy, dreary, very somber tunes with an emphasis on big soundscapes and some very mournful vocals. Anyone familiar with Insomnium should honestly know the deal by now, much like the record we just talked about. Not exactly a whole lot of surprises here, but also much like the record we just talked about, not really a bad thing if you are into this style. I would say what hurts this record more than the predictable writing would be the fact that it is a little too long. I mean, a majority of the songs could frankly have a minute or even 3 minutes cut off of them, and the entire album as a whole could probably be trimmed by 21 minutes. But all in all, a very solid batch of tunes. Anyone looking for something a little bit more melodramatic from the world of melodic death metal will enjoy this, and for that matter, anyone who loves Insomnium will enjoy this. Next up, the Legions of the Undead EP from Exmortus. And what a perfectly titled EP to drop right before Halloween, may I add. I've come to really enjoy Exmortus and their brand of epic, deadly, in-your-face, technical thrash and death metal. But the albums haven't quite stuck with me, and I think it ultimately has to do with the fact that there just isn't a lot of variety within the actual songs, and they do tend to resort to simply being neoclassical thrash-infused death metal, which is still very fun, but to sit down and listen to that for about an hour can get to be a bit much. Which is why I honestly think that at this rate, maybe Exmortus should go the EP route in the future, because I actually found myself way more invested in this than I had ever anticipated. Way more anticipated than I've ever been in any of their full-length studio albums, for that matter. It just feels a lot more enjoyable and easy to get into, and by the time I even begin to think, alright, let's move this along, or alright, I think I'm done with this, the EP comes to a pretty natural close. Weirdly, I kind of feel like Exmortus is actually taking more chance on this EP than they are on their last studio album. Take, for instance, the horror vibe that permeates across the album, and the fact that the band is actually covering instrumental scores to horror films. Take, for instance, the Beetlejuice theme from the Beetlejuice movie, which also, by the way, stands out as a killer piece of nasty, in-your-face guitar pyrotechnic nonsense. I highly recommend this EP. I think it is just a really fun, exciting experience, something Exmortus fans are definitely going to get into, and once again, I like it so much that I would even recommend Exmortus just maybe go the EP route from now on, or at the very least just invest in much shorter releases because it genuinely works better for them. Next up, the Last Ranger EP from Municipal Waste. I was actually pretty happy to get a hold of this EP. I mean, thrash metal, while significantly better in 2019 than it was in 2018, is still missing something seriously killer to end what I have now coined as the thrash metal drought. And with Municipal Waste being an incredibly dependable source of thrash metal, I went into this EP with some pretty solid expectations and came out of it with all of those expectations being met. You know the drill by now: mosh-friendly, beer-chugging, crossover party thrash with an emphasis on violence and riffs and in-your-face punk rock attitude, packed with songs that would just as easily inspire a karaoke-style sing-along as they would a fucking disgusting wall of death. I will say that perhaps unlike Exmortus, the EP format doesn't work so well for Municipal Waste because I get myself so pumped up and so ready for more thrash metal goodness, and then the EP naturally comes to an end. It's not a deal breaker, but it is something to note if you are a diehard fan and you've seriously been waiting for some sick, nasty thrash. But I suppose with that in mind, we do have this funny thing called Spotify, and you could just immediately go straight to another Municipal Waste record right after. So no harm done, I suppose. Most importantly, it succeeds at giving you a blast of pure thrash energy. Next up, Terminal Threshold by Dysrhythmia, a band that I feel like I should know more about. I mean, there's a lot of stuff about them that sounds right up my alley. They're weird, they're funky, they're jazzy, they kind of sound like a very bizarre concoction of the most extreme moments from Voivod with the experimental freedom of Gorguts, or even a band like Imperial Triumphant, although not quite as blatant and in your face. A lot of very weird, complex, and unorthodox soundscapes across the entire record. It's pretty enthralling from start to finish. It's very rare I find myself being really excited to sit down and listen to instrumental metal, but Dysrhythmia do a lot in the span of 32 minutes to really capture my attention and to keep me enthralled and invigorated. Hell, they do such a good job that I came this fucking close to reviewing them on the Metal Meltdown. I ultimately chose to review Issues instead because I felt that that was just a more interesting record to talk about and, all things considered, maybe a better one. But this is still really cool, and if you're looking for something very funky, very weird, very experimental, definitely can't go wrong with this. And on a very similar note, let's talk about the latest record from Toothgrinder, entitled I Am. Okay, it's definitely not as inherently fucked up as Dysrhythmia, no argument there, but there is definitely some weird stuff going along here, and Toothgrinder do a pretty good job at blending their weirder ideas with a pretty sturdy and competent mix of metalcore influences. I will admit that some of the more mainstream metal and pop flavors found on this record are a little bit more jarring and don't mesh quite as nicely. It kind of makes the whole thing kind of feel like this weird kind of pop-punk post-hardcore hybrid, but that's not inherently a bad thing. It's still a pretty interesting record. It's still written pretty well, and for people who like that kind of music, this is a great way to introduce them to more experimental flavors, to some heavier sounds without straying too far into super strange territory. Something I'm sure Toothgrinder is aware of to a certain extent, by the way, considering this particular song title, Too Soft for the Scene, Too Mean for the Green. I don't know, definitely not my favorite record of the ones we're talking about today, but there are some pretty cool ideas if you're interested in metalcore and post-hardcore and looking for that sound with a little bit of a poppier but still edgier kind of flair. Next up, The Burning Dawn from Cloak, a band that is offering up a pretty spicy mix of influences and ideas from across the extreme metal spectrum. I mean, primarily death metal, duh, but we're also seeing influences from doom metal, we're seeing influences from a little bit of black metal. All the songs are really distinct and play around with different time signatures, different themes, different ideas, different patterns. Cloak isn't really bringing anything to the table that's like brand new, but everything that they are bringing to the table is so well put together, so well organized, and so fine-tuned that it's really difficult not to get into it, not to enjoy it, not to simply shut the fuck up and start banging your head. I mean, I don't know about y'all, but I was hooked on this record pretty much right away with The Cleansing Fire, which showcases a lot of what I'm talking about quite obviously and effectively. Honestly, I have no criticisms about this album whatsoever. The only reason I ultimately didn't review it came down to time. I actually really wanted to. But I am happy that I at least got to talk about it here, and I would say that if I had actually reviewed it, I probably would have given it an insanely enthusiastic 3.5 out of 5. Next up, a self-titled EP from Heaven's Blade, a hardcore punk supergroup featuring some pretty impressive talent, to say the least. You've got Youth Code singer Sarah Taylor, you've got Alex Lopez from Suicide Silence, and you have not one, but two bassists from two different shock rock legends, Rob Zombie and Marilyn Manson, those people being Piggy D and Fred Sablan, respectively. This EP delivers an absolutely furious, scathing, straight-to-the-point blast of pure punk rock fucking carnage. And that's about it. It's very similar to the Fear Network EP from Ghostmain earlier this year, just offering a straight blast of in-your-face hardcore energy and then dipping the fuck out after like 3 to 5 minutes. Okay, so this EP does actually go on a little bit further than that, but the point being is that you're not exactly dealing with a particularly lavish and lengthy affair. Even by the standards of this genre, there's not exactly a lot going on in this EP, and that's not inherently a bad thing. I mean, I enjoyed the hell out of this. But considering the fact that this project has been around for a year, I kind of feel like, you know, we're owed a little bit more. I'm kind of left a little bit hungry after hearing some of this stuff. I'm hoping that this at least means a full-length album is on the way really shortly, because I want to hear more of this, because I really fucking enjoyed this. But I guess only time will tell if that's actually the case. And until that glorious day, I can at least come back to this EP and jam it over and over and over again, which I fully intend to do, by the way. Next up, an album that I assume is called UNUS. I don't fucking know. Here's what I do know. It's from a Canadian band called Necronomicon, who've actually been kicking around since 1992. I like this band, you know? They've got a pretty dark, menacing mix of black metal and death metal with some epic overtures and flavors thrown into the mix to make everything feel a little bit more dynamic and cinematic. But ultimately, there's not a whole lot to talk about as far as the actual music is concerned, which isn't to say that it's bad, but it's just kind of, you know, obvious. It's black and death metal, you know? What more do you want me to say? Everything that you expect from the black and death metal genre is here. The riffs, the attitude, the mentality. It sounds really fucking good. There's a lot of enthusiasm and energy and violence here. There's just not necessarily a whole lot of originality. And while it's not necessarily needed in order to be an entertaining record, it is somewhat necessary in order to warrant me talking about this, which is the main reason why I didn't. But hey, you know me, I have to talk about some great Canadian metal in some aspect, so at least I get to do it here. Not exactly a game-changing piece of black and death metal, but if you're looking for some fun black and death metal, you could certainly do a hell of a lot worse. Next up, Wretched Illusions from Creeping Death, an album that actually came out closer to the end of September, but I really like this album, so we're gonna break the rules a little bit, because I want to talk about it. This is just a super nasty slice of abrasive, greasy, extreme metal. I mean, it's got thrash metal flavors, it's got death metal flavors, it's got some groove metal flavors, all blended into a sickly, violent mixture that is going to have you headbanging like a motherfucker. Willing to bet a good chunk of you already know about this record, especially since some of you have been recommending this to me for quite some time. And if by some chance you aren't one of those people, if by some chance you don't know who they are, may I recommend looking this album up and changing that fucking ASAP. Like, I seriously challenge you not to headbang like a motherfucker to some of these super righteous tunes, especially with that killer fucking guitar tone. It is just fucking vicious. Highly recommend it. If you haven't already listened to it, What the fuck is wrong with you? Sit the fuck down and change that immediately. Next up, Disgorged from Psychotic Deaths from Montiferum, another album that I've heard a decent amount of buzz about, mostly from the death metal underground. Granted, considering how consistently awesome the underground death metal scene has been this year, it's pretty easy for people to get excited about yet another underground death metal record, but I digress. I personally wasn't really blown away by this record, though. I mean, it's definitely grisly, it's definitely brutal, it's definitely going to make people very happy with its uncompromising grossness. But that's kind of all it has going for it. I don't think the songs are really that unique or original. I don't really think they're that memorable. It is just kind of a bunch of death metal bashings and tropes thrown into maybe the world's worst blender, considering the sound mix, but a blender nonetheless. I got some enjoyment out of this record, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely not an album I'd probably ever come back to, especially considering, again, how awesome the underground death metal scene has been in 2019. Like, if I want this kind of super grisly, nasty death metal, I would much rather go to a band like Tomb or Gatecreeper than I would come back to a band like Montiferum. I just don't really think it has a lot going for it, but that being said, if you're a diehard fan of extreme metal and brutal death metal, then I don't really see why you wouldn't enjoy this record as well. Next up, A Monument to the Dead from Coffin, an album that, frankly, you could just take everything I just said about Montiferum and then apply it to this and call it a fucking day. I do think that this is probably a better constructed record and inherently somewhat better produced, but as far as the songwriting goes, there's nothing really that special going on here. As far as the performances go, there's nothing that really spectacular going on here. It is a pretty standard by-the-books underground death metal record. I guess if I had to pick between Montiferum and Coffin, I'd probably pick Coffin, but then again, I don't know if that really means anything coming from me because I didn't really care for either of these records. I mean, full disclosure, considering how tired I am right now, if you played them back to back, I probably wouldn't even be able to differentiate the two. Although that might not be fair because, as I just said, I'm actually getting pretty tired. I'm kind of recording this way later at night than I'm used to, so I'm starting to lose my energy. I'm ready to go to sleep. But hey, we've already made it this far, so why don't we try and finish things off with at least one more album, that album being All Hail by Norma Jean. I actually don't really know a whole lot about Norma Jean in general, so I can't really comment on where this stands within the band's discography, but I will say that as an individual album, it is an incredibly solid piece of cutthroat and surprisingly mature metalcore. This is yet another record where I was just kind of banging my head through the whole thing. I loved how angular and cutthroat the whole thing was. I loved how vicious it was. I loved how volatile the performances were. I loved how powerful it was. I loved the emotional context of everything. It didn't really suffer from a lot of the tropes and stereotypes that are often associated with this genre, and it was just a totally consistent and entertaining album all the way through. Now, when I was doing a little bit of research on this band, I noticed that, at least according to Wikipedia, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, but I did notice that apparently some of their other records are a wee bit more experimental. The Polar Similar album is even kind of quoted as being a post-hardcore, noise rock, mathcore influence record. And I guess I hear some of those influences a little bit within the atmosphere of this album, but I don't quite hear those influences being directly embedded and woven into the music. And that's maybe the one thing that I think would have really made this album a little bit more distinct and powerful, is a more experimental artistic edge. But as it stands, I was thoroughly entertained by this record, to the point where I actually am pretty curious to check out some of their older works, and I may just do that. Had I actually gone through with it and given this a full review, it probably would have gotten a pretty enthusiastic 3.5 out of 5 from me. And yeah, that's it. I'm certain I still missed something. Fucking certain of it, with the amount of music that's been released this month. If that's the case, let me know in the comments. Let me know on the Metal Meltdown's Facebook page. Let me know wherever else. Blah, 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 blah. I'm going to bed. I'm fucking tired. I don't know how I even got this tired. I felt fine when we started recording, but fuck it, that was a while ago. Press this button if you want updates, or don't. I don't give a fuck. I'm too tired to care right now. Here's what I do know. I know that I want you to have a fantastic fucking day. Now get the fuck out of here so I can go to sleep.